everyone. I'm really glad to be there at API Specification Conference. I'm here to present you a deep research we've done on the OpenAPI ecosystem and actually how OpenAPI is really the glue of 1,100 tools, so more than 1,000, but actually we found that it's the glue of more than 1,100 tools. And we try to understand like where it's trending, what are the potential for a next generation of tooling. So my name is Mehdi Medjaoui. I'm the founder of API Days conferences. Also, I built some API tools in the past, right? So the most known ones are WebShell. It was a big SDK for APIs. OAuth.io, like a security integration platform, right? And currently, I'm building a new company on, let's say, making, GDPR and CCPA, all privacy regulations, API enabled. So just to let you know a little bit what I'm working on. Some latest publications. I'm co-author of the book Continuous API Management, where we try to explain the API management practice continuously around API specifications. I'm also co-author of some reports for the European Commission about APIs for government or for data portability between services. But I'm not here today. I'm here today to tell you a little bit story about Malcolm McLean. I don't know if you know Malcolm McLean. Malcolm McLean is an entrepreneur, a US entrepreneur, and in 1937, Malcolm McLean said, okay, like we need more transport. We need more goods to be moved from one way to the other. So he built his first truck. And so he built a truck driver company and he started to transport goods from one place to the other. And actually he made the company with his brother. And 16 years later, Malcolm McLean has a company of 1,700 trucks. So 1,700 trucks, mostly on the East Coast, from New York, Philadelphia to Louisiana, and he manages all the transport from there by trucks. And he have this crazy idea. He say, why I'm still doing things via trucks, where actually I could do it by boats, right? You know, it would be simpler. I would need to hire less drivers, and so he really started to have this idea of putting trucks on boats. There is one thing at the time in the US that you have there is an antitrust law that obliges you to, that avoids you to have a company who is multimodal. You cannot have a trucks company, a boat company, an airline company, right? One mean of transport only at the time. So he said, okay. He sold this truck company to create a boat company, and he tried to put boats on it, right? And so this is where the shipping container story, actually, some of you may have understood already, starts. It's when someone decided to think transport differently by putting like specific tin can, right, big tin cans on trucks. For the final story part, the first time Malcolm McLean tried to put containers on boats, actually he put the trucks directly on boats, but with the wheels, and so that. With the tide and everything, that was not working well. It was a failure, all right? But after he understood that he has to remove the wheels, but for that he needed to think multimodal. He needed to think that, okay, but I will be able to unload these packages and put them directly on trucks. Just to give you a hint at the time, the average time to load a boat was like 5 days, right? 5 days with a lot of cost, a lot of breakage. People were moving things by hand. It was not packaged, so a lot of things were breaking. So the average cost of transport of a good was like 30% of final price. Just imagine like how crazy it is, 30% of final price. Imagine you order an iPhone from China and you pay 30% more because you order it from transported by boat. Like it's crazy. This is why at the time we had more local work and more local employment. We could not delocalize anything, right, because of this cost of transport. So just to give you a hint right about how it was. But because of this container idea, the cost of transport has been reduced by 96%, so it was extremely cheap. And also the cost of loading and unloading a boat from 5 days to 8 hours, and from approximately $5 per ton loaded to like 16 cents, right? Just to tell you the order of magnitude of difference, right? Why? Because we decided to have conventions. We decided to agree about how we lift, how we transport, how we move the container, right? And so I really love the book. I really recommend you to read it, from Mark Levinson. It's a book about like how the shipping, so-called the box, right? But how the shipping container made the world smaller and the world economy bigger, right? Exactly this idea. We could delocalize as long as we are able to import, and so the world was smaller, but the economy went bigger because of something we call Jevons paradox. I will go back on this later. So Jevons paradox, what it is? Jevons paradox is when something becomes a commodity, we use more of it. Actually, we don't do savings almost on anything. Right? We use more of it. So just an example, we talk a lot about environment these days. Fuel efficiency, so yeah, fuel efficiency gains tends to increase and not decrease fuel use. When cars were able to consume less to go further, actually we travel further, right? Nobody stops and say, okay, we were able to do only 100 miles a day with a hybrid car, for example, electric car. Okay, now they can do 300. We don't stop at 100, we go over, right? So this idea of when you reduce the cost of something, you actually augment its use, right? For environment, it's not great, but for the economy, it can be really great. So to finish the story on the container, but you get where I'm going on OpenAPI. Yeah, the idea is that in 1937, he started the truck company. 1955, he buy the boat company to actually be able to do his entrepreneurship journey. The slide will be available if you want the full story. But what's really important is that in 1956, he ships his first 60 containers, a ship called ADLX, right, from Newark to Houston. And in the same year, actually, he had a system called fitting that will enable really to fit the containers onto the vehicle. That was the first interoperability, right? You know, that was the first time we were able to really to fit with the direct conventions, like not machine readable in a machine readable way, as we will see with software, but like to really to fit exactly how it is. Like, so it's really structured. Let's call it like that, a structured standard, right? I go a little bit faster, but in 1968, we start the first international standard organization, right? So it's released as an open standard, and actually that made really really recognized, because at the time, let's remind that we had competing container size, competing containers conventions, and at some point, Malcolm McLean, who was the leader at the time, said, okay, I need to open source, or standardize my convention, my specifications, so it can win, and I will have let's say, I will have a piece of a larger pie, right? So that's really the idea behind that. And to finish, because it has a lot of implication. 1972, we found that actually 2/3 of longshoremen in the U.S. Have decreased, because of this ability of automation, right? Of great automation. And also in 1977, the Airline Deregulation Act enabled to have, let's say, not the need anymore of one transport way only. Now you can be multimodal between different sections. So this is what we have now, right? But actually, it's environmentally it may be a failure, but on the, let's say, on the shipping, logistics, supply chain, and economy-wide, it's a success, right? It's a massive automation at scale, right? You can see the tooling, right? The cranes, you can see everything, right? So that's really the idea behind that. This is what we have on the API landscape these days. So this is a landscape, right? That this is the research we do, right? All of companies on these landscapes are at some point interoperable, using, promoting, or completely integrated with OpenAPI, right? So we will dive more into that. But if you go, let me check. We have a full website. We have 1,145 tools, and you can go, for example, I don't know if you go on API management and API gateways, right? Or if you want API consulting, access and identity management, API design documentation. So just an example, I click here on Postman, right? And we try to do research on exactly what are the potential revenues, what are the funding, what are the latest trends, blog posts, whatever, to really check what are the health of company using open APIs, right, or highly integrated with open API. So we have a search engine, we have a lot of things. We have an API, right? So to access to that, so the numbers I will share with you are based on these numbers, right? You can also download the map and you can have a poster at home. So let's go back on the presentation there. Yeah, all of this, as I said, all these tools are actually OpenAPI powered at some point, or OpenAPI-driven. For the quick story, for the one who doesn't know, OpenAPI, created in 2011 as a tool for automating, let's say, API definition and descriptions called Swagger by Tony Tam, who was at Wording at the time. 2013, we have competing standards, like we had competing container size, right? We have competing specification standards, RAML, mostly driven by MuleSoft at the time, API Blueprint, mostly driven by a company called Apiary. So we have competing, let's say, definitions. And so Swagger is acquired by SmartBear in 2015 from Wording, right? Released at the Linux Foundation as the OpenAPI Initiative and OpenAPI Specification 2016. OpenAPI v3 released and 3.1 and whatever. So just to give you a little bit story, but this is exactly the same story we see with the containers. Like someone has a great idea, competing standards, right? Competing conventions or definitions. One is actually more open than the others, or more adopted, and so it grows over time, right? So this is exactly the same idea. And so I love this drawing from a good API, right? But it tried to do a flow about like how open API definitions are able to generate a lot of tooling. So I don't know if you see here, but this is the API descriptions. And this is actually in green, all the things you can generate directly, right? The developer portal, the documentation, the SDKs, and whatever. So I love this representation. It really tells you and helps also in companies to show like what will change if we really adopt contract-driven development and we really put the specification in the center of the, let's say, API supply chain, exactly like if we put the container at the center of the shipping supply chain, right? So you can see it as a cycle, you can see it as the way you want, but again, OpenAPI enabled the creation of many tools, right, that could be reused at scale by companies, and so diminishing the cost of designing, building, producing, publishing, maintaining APIs, right? So exactly the Jevons paradox. Because it's cheaper, now we can do more. We can do more work and we can publish more, right? So this is now the Jevons paradox applied to IT services. Again, you get this idea. The cheaper it is, the more we do, right? And so this is 10 years later at the API Specification Conference. Again, we will see that a lot of things are actually can be done. So just some large numbers before we dive into how exactly this ecosystem is structured. So the total number of funding and valuation of the ecosystem is $174 billion, right? That's a lot. That's a lot. All enabled, of course, by entrepreneurs and by need of industry, but actually enabled by the fact we have a specification that enable to do more of it, right? Mostly driven by API Lifecycle platforms, but we can see backend building tools, business process as a service or API as a product, integration platform as a service, or API aggregators and API abstractions. Again, all of this supported or driven directly by OpenAPI specifications. Just to tell you, in the first 6 months of 2022, $20 billion have been invested into API tooling, right? So that's a lot, right? That's a lot worldwide. And more than 118 tools. We discovered more than 118 tools extra, right? We probably missed some of them, right? But at least, like we do this constant research to help people understand the ecosystem. So if we go on the landscape, again, I will share it later, but you can browse the landscape and directly check on apilandscape.apsyn.io. I will share the link again at the end. But yeah, as I said, it's decomposed into 5 main sections, and we have subsections also for each of these. I'll let you discover that in depth, but my goal here is to tell you the trends, the micro trends, the macro trends, and so we'll try to finish together the discussion. So the first trend on API Lifecycle platforms, again, is mostly, on the whole ecosystem, is mostly driven by what we call API as a product. again, there are more than that, but we took a sample, right? Then it's really API Lifecycle platforms, right? And most of the sponsors here are at some point API Lifecycle platforms, whatever, testing, security, monitoring, design, whatever. We have also a lot of backend building tools, like how we can generate APIs on top of databases or stuff like that. We have also integration platform as a service. As I said, it's like people that enable you to help you to integrate APIs. And then we have, oh, it's a mistake here, but we have API aggregators, like people who wrap APIs around facades, right, and publish an OpenAPI specification on top of everything. So if we go on the API management lifecycle, so this is the different section we have. We have some consulting companies, right, but API management gateway, design documentation, access and identity management, testing, security, whatever IoT APIs, device APIs, right? API analytics and monitoring tools, streaming, event architecture, API platforms, or developer portal products, right? So you'll be able to see that. And what we've seen also a lot of consolidation over the recent years. This is the acquisitions. So Broadcom has acquired CA Technology, that acquired Layer 7, that had acquired Renscope. So we see a lot of consolidation, right? In the past years, Google acquired AppSheet, but APG has acquired UserGrid and stuff like that. So again, IBM acquired Red Hat, but Red Hat had acquired Triticale before. So we see a lot of consolidation that also has driven something else that actually also OpenAPI enabled, new open source providers, right? And these open source providers are more than the others OpenAPI driven. They are directly, they're inherently driven and integrated with OpenAPI. To name a few, Gravity, Kong, Nginx, Solo, 3Scale, Tag, WSO2. Again, they are been really strong adopters of OpenAPI specifications, and they are. So open specification, open source tooling, you know, it goes together. The cumulative funding to date, it's really more about API management and gateways, but you can see security is right around the corner, and you can see other tools, right, who are directly there. So again, you have access to all the deep data, but just to give you like the macro trends, right? For the backend building tools, most of we have mostly serverless infrastructure, cloud APIs, serverless. We have like banking and insurance backends, like dedicated insurance backends in finance backends. We have also API deployment, backend building, headless CMS, mobile backend as a service. Yes, we still have some. And also what we call blockchain, whatever APIs or people that enable to access you to blockchain systems. And again, the funding is mostly on the infrastructure and banking aspect, right? So, and just to tell you, in these industries, we even have some OpenAPI specifications standards that are published. We continue on the API as a product. So API as a product, again, there are many possible, but it can be messaging, data, payments, AI, e-commerce, or whatever. And again, a multiplicity of tools, and all of them have at some point an OpenAPI specifications that is public, right? And so that enables them to really be adopted and be integrated by others. On the funding part, mostly the payments, you know, a company like Stripe and Adyen and others like really paved the way for others. But you can see that a lot of funding in that space too. For the integration platform as a service, for integration platform as a service, you can see mostly it's like automation and orchestrations, or some let's say finance integration platforms. And again, the funding is quite impressive. Mostly also because of crazy acquisitions, but just to give you a hint about how it is. And I'll finish the vertical API abstraction and aggregators. Again, vertical abstractions on many regulated industries, actually, healthcare, finance, transport, logistics, and others, right? And you can see the funding, again, mostly driven by finance. And this is actually where we see most of the OpenAPI specifications that are published. It's in the finance sector, they really try to make standards and conventions, right, on this industry. So we can agree on how we run that. And I'll just finish, check the time here. I'll just finish for the last 5 minutes, 6 minutes we have, just to give you like some other trends that we see from there, like industry trends. The first one is like tech regulations are pushing the adoption of APIs. So you've seen by the numbers, finance is one of the main, mostly driven by a regulation called PSD2 in Europe, like Payment Service Directive 2, that was in 2013. We have PSD3 that is in draft, so new generation of financial tools. But again, you can see regulations in many places of the world, right, to push companies to adopt APIs. And so what do we have? Competing standards. We have, for example, the Berlin Group, who have an OpenAPI specifications that they published. We have also STET Group, STET, another one, who also try to compete with their OpenAPI specifications. So we had the specification competition. Now let's say OpenAPI has one, and now we have OpenAPI documents competition. So again, it never stops, but at least we keep some innovation. Not only the finance, the healthcare industry, with FHIR APIs, right? And a lot of regulation obliging for API interoperability. Yes, and also the GDPR, privacy aspect, also obliging many companies to adopt APIs for interoperability for user data. Again, now there are many OpenAPI documents specifications who are published to make that possible. Trend number 2, because of regulations, we have industry-specific solutions. Of course, because of regulation in banking or regulation in healthcare, we have dedicated solutions and tooling in banking or in healthcare, right? So that seems simple. In the landscape, you will be able to see we have specific sections about it, right? You will be able to browse, but again, that's specific sections because of these regulations that are directly. So we expect OpenAPI tooling to go more in going into specific sectors. I also invite you to discover the Open Insurance Initiative. Again, it's like 50 insurers who are gathered around an OpenAPI specifications to publish one that everybody will be able to use as insurers working together for a saner ecosystem. Trend number 3, API security is now a standalone product. So we've seen more and more security in OpenAPI specifications, like security being integrated, right? And actually, what happens when new tooling, new opportunities, there is really an API security arms race heating up, right? So some companies, to name a few, Traceable, No Name, 42Crunch here, great contributors on OpenAPI specifications, Web Security, Salt. That represents like a $200 million of funding just this year, right? And so we can see that API security is actually a standalone product of the landscape, and we see more and more who are separated than API management and API gateways. That's extremely interesting. So now they consider gateways are not secure enough. They need more tooling, and again, based on OpenAPI specification. Discovery, mostly, to discover the shadow APIs, right, and rebuild OpenAPI specification on top of that, or analyzing the current APIs to check if they're respecting the OWASP security top 10. So really, we see a clear distinctions between the two. And just to let you know, so it's in SALT security report, but there is a section where they say privacy regulations is also highly demanded. So we see even so API management in gateways, we see security out of it, right? And it seems privacy is even one of it. And we've seen also a company called X8 who I think do privacy gateways. It's like privacy regulation checked at the gateway level. Again, more tooling because of more innovation. Trend number 4, the APIs are a new layer of infrastructure, as we've seen. So the idea of API as a product, but we see more and more of it. It's a quote from Jeff Lawson from Twilio, like, the world is getting broken down into APIs. So every part of the stack of a business that the developer might need to build is eventually turning into APIs that the developer can use, right? So same idea, every piece of software at some point can be wrapped around an API that can be used by others. And if I specialize into it, some people will consume my APIs versus rebuilding it themselves. But this trend is really hard, right? And we can, again, this is why we started with the container. This is the story of supply chain, right? What piece of software we will integrate, what piece of software we will build ourselves, and how we will let's say, orchestrate all these different software that's inside my company, outside my company. And again, OpenAPI specifications are actually the glue of all of these. In the landscape, we have a specific sections that you can browse and search, right? So just to say, some companies have been actually extremely successful in this, right? Yeah, and again, because of the ability to be easily integrated and consumed, it's also scale the thing. You know, two payment services could be the same, but their API, the fact they are documented, their tooling, integration tooling, SDKs on top of it, make them more consumable and actually makes you a winner. Even if sometimes even your service is not as good, but the consumption is better, developer would prefer a value a little bit less higher, but that you can consume in 2 hours versus 2 months, right? So again, this tooling ecosystem is enabling that there. Trend number 5 is the low-code aspect. We see more and more low-code platforms who take OpenAPI specifications to be able to integrate, mock, trigger and automations and services. And we see that some people believe in the next 5 years, 2/3 of the people building business applications will be what we call citizen developers, like no-coder, right? It's funny, we see currently in Europe like some no-code bootcamp. So after 3 months, you learn how to no-code. They don't know how to call them, right? But yeah, that's there. Right? So if you find a name, I'll take it. Yeah, so this is a trend, and again, OpenAPI is really the interface for, let's say, no-code tooling, right? So just to finish, to sum up this part, so OpenAPI enabled a huge ecosystem of tooling, like more than 1,100 tools, companies who are profitable, growing. So API management market is one of the main of them, but creating a lot of open source communities. Regulation obliged the use of APIs in specific spaces where they publish OpenAPI specifications. That drives new product specialized into that industry. API security is now a standalone product. Soon, privacy is following, right? So with the dedicated specifications. More API as a product have their own specifications, and citizen developers will be 2/3 of the workforce in 5 years. So be sure that when you publish APIs and OpenAPI documents on top of it, be sure that they can be integrated into no-code. And I don't know how the OpenAPI initiative will take that in account. So what's next? OpenAPI made the API world smaller, but the API can be bigger. What's next? We had different container size for standards. We may have different specs, right? So again, the innovation will come. We will see what comes. But again, it's okay to have different conventions and standards as long as they fit with each other. So I think they fit with each other, this one. So yeah, I hope it will be there. I just finished my last slide by inviting you to read a book from Marshall van Alstyne, Platform Revolution. Because in his research, he found that companies who open APIs actually make over 10 years, right? Stock market and company who worth more than $2 billion, so not startups, right? They made in average 68% more revenues and 38% more net income. So it's MIT research, it's not whatever Vander research. It's MIT research. And this is I will finish on this. This is the graph he showed about company of the same sector, same industry, same size, right? For the one who adopt an API strategy strongly versus the one who don't, you can definitely see a shift because actually this is what he wrote in 2 papers. APIs have a strong impact in company performance, like reducing internal costs. Also, this enabled by OpenAPI contract-driven development that was there. But also this recent paper is like how API create growth by inverting the firm. It's true that because you're open, you invite work, investment, and let's say innovation inside your companies because you're open to others. So yeah, OpenAPI enabled a large ecosystem of tools that reduce the cost of building APIs. Because of that, we publish more APIs and actually we're able to accumulate more value. I think, yeah, the last 10 years of OpenAPIs has been flourishing. I hope the next one will be as flourishing. Thank you very much. And I think I'm Good on time.
Hey, Mehdi, what is your API landscape?
Oh, sorry, I don't know. Yeah, if you go on API landscape.apicin.io, you will be able to see the landscape.
Right, but do you have a lot of data in there? Where is it coming from?
Oh, it's coming from the landscape, like all the data we collect on all the companies. So the data comes from Crunchbase, LinkedIn, comes from Dun & Bradstreet, from company source as much as we can, right? And actually all the API, I won't publish it on Twitter, but we have the API landscape state of the market report. So if you go on the website, all the numbers you've seen and everything, they are actually downloaded. You can download them via API Industry state of the market report. So all the numbers you've seen, the graphs and everything, there is a landscape that you can find there. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, please.
You know that picture you had before of the car with all the different components?
Yeah, the cars, yes.
Yeah, so that looks, I think, like a 19. That's like I said. That looks to me like a Golf, doesn't it? I think that's a Golf.
Golf cart?
Yeah.
Golf. Yeah. An old Golf. Yeah.
From probably the
80s. Yeah.
80s. And one of the interesting things is in a modern car, I understand the main, most expensive component in a modern car is the electronic wiring harness, which goes then what happens with barely a transistor in that thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, in a modern car, it's actually stuffed the gun up with software. So there's no software in that car.
No.
It wouldn't work that software. None of it would work. And the third thing, of course, is how API powered. Your Tesla is all APIs.
Yeah.
And yet they're all closed APIs.
Yeah, but
If they were, then you have a whole world of interconnected cars talking to one another about road conditions or weather or congestion or whatever it might be. But it could be powered by that.
yeah, but
Amazing how transformation.
no, agree. I shared this picture because I think we're still at the first era of supply chain, even for APIs. We are not into like the next generation, right? We need more tooling, more there. But again, this is why I showed this picture with the recent but old, let's say, supply chain industry, right? One number I've discovered on this is that 80% of the value of the supply chain here is on the IP aspect, design and IP, and reselling. The manufacturing is only like 20%, right, of the value. So the more is understanding how you orchestrate them, more than how you build them, actually, right? So this is why it's extremely important to know what do you consume from others, what do you deliver to others, and actually just building it, assembling, whatever, is the lower part of the value, right?
Because on a modern Golf, if you did that with the 2022 Golf, you would have all those bits, almost all of them, plus the wiring harness thing, which you don't have there. But the value, all the other components, the software components, the API, and everything is invisible. Whereas there, of course, you can see everything. You can see all these bits that somebody has designed and built and actually manufactured. They all still got to be made in a factory somewhere. Every single one of those bits is still made in a factory with a car. There's a whole lot of extra bits that you can't see.
Yeah, I agree, but it's also for the ability to see that I use this picture. Yeah, and also the average number of pieces, like nuts and bolts in a car, in an old Golf, is like 30,000, like 25, 30,000. Where now in a recent car, electric cars or whatever, it's a lot less. Like it's
Simpler because there's fewer components. The engine, I mean, that's a whole other world of internal combustion engines and how the hell we ever built a world that uses internal combustion engines compared to electric motors, which is simpler. But
I think the software we're leaving the same thing, right? We went to smaller things into more larger things. So yeah. I'll send you the picture. Thank you very much. Next speaker is coming.